They slammed him onto hot asphalt with guns shaking inches from his face, screaming, "Stop resisting," while he lay completely still. What they didn't know was that the calm black man they were arresting had one phone call that would reach higher than any judge, higher than any chief, straight into the White House itself, and by the end of the night, careers would be erased, secrets exposed, and a small town police department would never recover. So if you want real justice stories where power gets flipped and the truth hits like a hammer, subscribe now because this one escalates fast and doesn't let go. The night Marcus Ellison was arrested began like any other quiet drive home, his dashboard clock glowing 11:47 p.m. as rain slicked the empty streets and jazz hummed low through the speakers, his tailored suit jacket folded neatly on the passenger seat after a long day consulting for a logistics firm that preferred anonymity over publicity, and when the red and blue lights erupted behind him he pulled over immediately, hands visible on the wheel, engine off, window down, doing everything his father had taught him to do to survive encounters that shouldn't have required survival tactics at all. Yet the officers approached with hands already on their weapons, voices sharp, asking questions that didn't quite make sense. Where are you coming from? Whose car is this? Why are you nervous? Even though he wasn't, and when Marcus calmly asked the reason for the stop, Officer Briggs snapped that the taillight was out, though Marcus could see its reflection shining bright in the wet pavement, and when he politely said so, the mood changed instantly as if civility itself had become a threat, Briggs ordering him out of the vehicle, Officer Klein circling like a predator, and before Marcus could even fully step out he was shoved forward, hands yanked behind his back, his calm protest of, "I'm not resisting," drowned out by the rehearsed chant of, "Stop resisting," shouted loud enough to justify what they were doing, guns drawn, knees in his back, gravel biting into his cheek as rain mixed with blood from a split lip, passing drivers slowing just long enough to see another black man pinned to the ground by armed officers and deciding it was safer not to look too closely, and as cuffs snapped tight enough to cut circulation Briggs leaned close and whispered that if Marcus kept talking he'd make it worse, which Marcus understood not as a threat of legal consequence but of something far more final. Yet even then he didn't panic because Marcus Ellison had learned long ago that real power didn't shout, didn't fight, and didn't beg, it waited, and when they hauled him into the back of the cruiser, confiscated his phone, and booked him for resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and suspicion of vehicle theft despite matching registration and insurance, Marcus sat silently in the holding cell under flickering fluorescent lights while Briggs and Klein joked outside about teaching another one, a lesson, unaware that the desk sergeant, tired and careless, slid Marcus's wallet into a property tray without noticing the small, unassuming card tucked behind his driver's license, a card that didn't look like much at first glance but carried a secure number that didn't ring like a normal phone when dialed, and when Marcus finally requested his one call, the sergeant rolled his eyes and pushed the phone toward him, expecting a public defender or a frantic relative, and Marcus dialed from memory, listening as the line clicked once, twice, then connected to a calm professional voice that didn't ask who he was but simply said, "This is the office," and Marcus spoke evenly, giving his name, location, and the phrase he'd been instructed to use only if there was no other option, a phrase that made the voice pause for the first time before replying, "Stay where you are," and within minutes things began to shift in ways the officers couldn't immediately explain. First a call to the precinct from the city attorney asking pointed questions about probable cause, then another from internal affairs requesting preservation of all body cam footage, then the chief himself storming in, face pale, demanding to know who was in holding cell 3, Briggs laughing it off until the chief ordered the cuffs removed immediately, but the real shockwave hit when unmarked black SUVs rolled into the lot and men in suits stepped out with the kind of authority that didn't need badges displayed, pulling footage, seizing reports, instructing everyone present not to make a single phone call, and as Marcus was escorted, not dragged, into a quiet interview room, he finally explained that while he preferred to keep his work private, he served as a senior civilian advisor on infrastructure resilience, a role that often required direct briefings with federal leadership and a security clearance that triggered alarms the moment his name crossed certain databases, and while that alone was enough to end the night very differently than it began, it was the body cam footage that sealed the office's fates, footage that showed no taillight violation, no resistance, only escalation, slurs muttered under breath, and a rehearsed narrative collapsing frame by frame, and by dawn Briggs and Klein were suspended, by noon they were fired, and within weeks federal charges followed for civil rights violations, falsifying reports, and a pattern of misconduct that investigators uncovered once someone powerful enough finally forced the door open, revealing dozens of similar arrests quietly settled or ignored, and the town tried to move on, issuing statements about isolated incidents and rebuilding trust, but trust doesn't rebuild itself when truth has been buried for years, and Marcus, true to his nature, didn't give interviews or victory speeches, instead filing a lawsuit that forced mandatory reforms, independent oversight, and the release of records that had been sealed for far too long. And on the one-year anniversary of the arrest he drove the same route home, jazz playing softly, taillights shining bright, passing the precinct now under new leadership with a banner out front reading, "Community First," knowing that the real reason those words were there wasn't because of slogans or promises but because on one rainy night a system collided with someone who knew how to make it answer for itself, and while the officers who once shouted, "Stop resisting," now struggled to find work or sympathy, Marcus continued quietly doing what he always had, moving through corridors of power not to dominate but to correct, understanding that justice doesn't always arrive with sirens and speeches, sometimes it arrives with a calm voice on the other end of a secure line, and when it does, it changes everything.